Welcome to Spiritist Conversations, a place where we talk with friends in an unscripted, unplugged way. Today we find ourselves driving back from Brisbane, Australia to Gold Coast, also in Australia, after having had a chance to talk with folks at the Pedro and Emmanuel Spiritist Center in Brisbane. And I'm here on the car with two wonderful people. To my right, driving the car, and yes, we're driving on the wrong side of the road, is Helga. Hi, Helga. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
And with us here, too, we have Charles. Charles, how are you doing?
Hello, Daniel. Fine, very fine. Happy to be here and to participate to this podcast.
Thank you. And as you guys all know, we have a very fancy podcast here, so you will be hearing a lot of background music. Noise. You might hear cars going by and noises and so forth, because we are literally making the best use of our time and talking as we go to drive along. But before anything else, I actually want to go the other way around and ask Charles to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about you, Charles.
Yeah, so my name is Charles Kempf. I'm French, born in Alsace, France, and my first contact with Spiritism was in Brazil. I spent 8 years of my life in Brazil, and that's where I heard the first time talking about Allan Kardec. I didn't know him before in France, and the people were wondering, hey, you are French and you don't know Kardec? No, sorry, I don't know who it is. Can you tell me more about him? So this is like it started. I read the first book of Kardec in Portuguese, of course, at that time. And after
you read the first Kardec. Your first Kardec book was actually in Portuguese.
Yes, all of them.
How ironic.
Yeah, and a couple of years later, we came back to France, and then it's of course when I was searching the book of Kardec in France, it was quite relatively easy to find them because there are several publishing companies doing them at that time and still today. But on another side, I was also looking for a Spiritist group in France, and it was, a Spiritist or spiritual desert. So that made me aware to see, I was in Brazil to learn about it, to participate to the group, to see how it works, and then come back to France in order to construct again something about Spiritist movement in France. And that since 1992 I was participating of the French Federation. 1995 also the International Spiritist Council, so I could facilitate the contacts by talking French and Portuguese languages. In 1997 we created also a small group in the region where I moved at that time. And that's it. Since I'm working regularly in all these institutions, including also the French-speaking Spiritist movement, which is somehow facilitating all what's French language concerning Spiritism.
Wonderful, wonderful. And now we have you here in this international car, where people from France, the US, and Australia are driving back. It almost sounds like the beginning of a joke, right? 3 people in the car.
On the wrong side of the world.
On the wrong side of the world. How about you, Helga? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I was born in Brazil, so my parents are German. So I had this German background while I grew up. And so I picked actually both cultures, and I always liked the idea of reincarnation and knew very little about Spiritism, but then I met my actual husband, Marcelo, and his mother, she was very Spiritist, so she was always participating and she loved to talk about it. And so I got a bit wiser about it, so I got more information about Spiritism. But after finishing studies, I'm a physiotherapist, so after finishing in Brazil my studies, I went to Germany to live there for a while. and to work. But it wasn't until we went back to Brazil. So after 7 years in Germany, we went back to Brazil, and then we felt, I think you have some points in your life where you realize you need to do some changes, or at least try to change yourself to better. So at that point, we felt we really needed to go after that. And the thought about going to a Spiritist center was really good. In Brazil, you have so many of them, so we found one very easily at that stage. That was about 2004. And we stayed there until we went, so my husband was sent to China to work there, where we actually missed Spiritism, so a group very much, because we were only, we two there. There were other Catholic friends and all, but we didn't have really the chance to develop any conversations about that. But we kept on studying and always doing our meetings, and also talking to our children about Spiritism, about how important it is to try to improve yourself, because we are actually the only ones who we can change in this life. And then we went, after 4 years in China, we had a new change again.
As we slow down, to be very careful.
Yeah, very careful.
There you
and
go.
Now we go again. And so after 4 years in China, we decided to move, and we decided to make a big step and come to Australia. So we came, we have 2 boys, and it was a very big change and a very great responsibility to do that. But I think at this stage it was the right decision to do. And we actually were so glad, because we came to Brisbane, where we have 2 spirit centers. So we have Pedro Emanuel, from where we just came, and the other one where I participate mostly, which is Brisbane Spiritist Center.
All right, now that you have met Charles and Helga, and you also know that we're driving safely, let's skip ahead and jump straight into it, shall we?
Wonderful, thank you. And so the one thing that we have in common in this car is the fact that we obviously enjoy Spiritism, and that all started back in Charles' land. So one of the things that Charles probably did not tell you yet is that he has spent quite a bit of time not only researching Spiritism, but Kardec as well. So we figured since we have him strapped up in a car and he cannot go anywhere else, that we would force him to talk to us and share some of his learning and some of his research with us. So maybe we can kick it back to you, Charles, and ask you, how is Spiritism in France? We know that it started there, and of course we still have lots of Spiritism in France, but how are things? Can you walk us through your research and your experience, and tell us how history has unfolded, and how are we doing today?
Okay, so let's start then with Kardec himself. 1857, everybody knows the first issue of the Spiritist books, means 160 years now. The Spiritist movement at that time grew very quickly. In very few years, there were more than 100 Spiritist groups and several thousand Spiritists. There are some statistics even talking above 1 million. Kardec himself made some travels in France, in Lyon mostly, 1862, and also some other cities around France, including Tours and south of France and so on. And he could really see how developed was the Spiritist movement in those first years. So he made this codification with 4 other books that followed the Spirit's book, books, Medium's book,
The Gospels explained
Gospel
by
according to
Spiritists.
Heaven and Hell, and Genesis. And then he discarnated in 1869. That was then a period a little bit more difficult for France. Why? Because there was La Commune, some kind of revolution in certain way, and the war also against Prussia with a lot of difficulties. And in the 70s, basically the Spiritist movement after Kardec suffered a lot because mostly I think for reasons of divisions, different point of views of different Spiritist leaders at that time. It was mostly, I would say, the Alexandre Delanne, the father of Gabriel Delanne, and on the other hand, Pierre Gaëtan Lemarie, which both knew Kardec, participated to the group, and so on. But in the 70s, it was very clear that Lemarie followed a very open way. He was himself administrator of the Society for Continuation of Kardec's works. And he opened, I would say, between brackets, the business of selling books and the Spiritist magazine and so on. A little bit too much, because he opened the door to Masonry, opened the door to Theosophy and to a lot of other
Philosophies or ideologies.
philosophies that popped up at that time. Whilst on the other hand, Gabriel Delanne and his father Alexandre and some others which were with them were preferring to stay, to follow closer the Kardec orientation. So Amélie Boudet, which was the widow of Allan Kardec, survived until 1883. And it's really when because she was still maintaining a little bit of union between all these, he was in contact with all the parties and so on. But after her discarnation, then the separation was, let's say, a little bit stronger. And this took on then until more or less beginning of 20th century, the First World War, with these two tendencies, and one very close to occultism and to some other philosophies, and the other one a little bit more pure, following the Spiritist teachings. And then the First World War was also a big hit to the Spiritist movement, which was strong until there. And after the... Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. And I was going to say, and I think to Europe in general, right? Not only from a Spiritist perspective, from a philosophical perspective, and especially with two wars back to back, do you feel like Europe took a little bit of a stance towards a more negative view of the world, like with nihilistic movements and so forth?
Exactly.
Do you feel like that was perhaps less open to, religious, spiritual perspectives? Is that a fair assessment, or how do you feel that went?
The First and the Second World War, which happened in the first half of the 20th century, were really a big shock for everybody, because Europe was more or less considered as a model of civilization, and such awful things happening during that period was clearly a shock for a lot of people, and a lot of people, as you just told, became skeptical. Okay, if God would exist, he would not let such things happen. You see this type of reasoning. And also this in parallel to the industrial development. The people were focusing more, let's say, on materialism, and lost a little bit the interest on spiritualism. That was very clear. And this was also in parallel with traditional religions, who are still today stagnating in some religious dogmatic approach, and which was less and less answering to the questions, legitimate questions that the people were asking, and not as satisfying them anymore.
And on top of that, we have the growth of just science in general, right? As part of the commercial piece. And so we have a really big dichotomy in lots of different places that did not help the cause, right?
Exactly.
And what happened afterwards?
So after this, I mean, the Spiritist movement, there was Léon Denis still and Gabriel Delanne. So they discarnated the first one in Gabriel Delanne in 1926, and Léon Denis the year after, 1927. And Camille Flammarion, which was another one in 1925. And after this, there was really not a strong and pure follower of Kardec anymore in France, you know.
And if I may,
that's when the movement declined and lost in strength.
And if I may interrupt you there and be super rude, which I'm really good at, can you tell us a little bit, because I think that Delanne, Flammarion, and all those folks are not that acknowledged or even known today, sometimes among the younger Spiritist circle. Can you tell us a little bit what were the importance of Denis, Delanne, and Flammarion?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Camille Flammarion, he started very young participating to the Kardec's Société Parisienne d'Études Spirit, and he was a medium, getting some communications, and had a strong participation to the elaboration of the Genesis, in particular for the how to say, all this cosmogony and...
he was the head of the astronomical piece work at a really early age, I believe. Like at the
Observatoire de Juvisy,
something like at 18 years of age, he was leading the charge there.
Exactly, and he was its most famous French astronomer still today, and his books are really still today used as reference.
Oh, interesting! I did not know
so
that.
He was Spiritist at the beginning, let's say a little bit less. Then he was a period. Some attributed him to express clear doubts about the authenticity and claiming that he was able to write himself, that what he got was not come from spirits. You know, there was some period like that. But really at the end part of his life, between 1910 and 1925, that is where he wrote his most famous book, and very strongly confirming the Spiritist phenomenology and the truth of the Spiritism, or the Spiritist philosophy. Then Gabriel Delanne, he was the scientist, so he was a young boy. He's born 1857, means the year that Kardec published the Spirit's book. And he then was schooled in the École Centrale de Paris. He was engineer, and he developed a lot the scientific approach of Spiritism, but not only like metapsychics or what was called psychical studies at that time, means just studying the phenomenon, but not going beyond that, pushing all the consequences out of it. So he was really pushing all the consequences out of it and confirming the Spiritist philosophy as codified by Allan Kardec through all the phenomenologies that has been added on during that period. So he was really, let's say, the scientific developer of Spiritism in France. And Léon Denis, he was more, let's say, he developed a lot the philosophical aspects, and wrote some very nice books like After Death, and the problem of the being and the destiny. And all these books are really extremely appreciated still today in France, in the same way as in a lot of other countries. In Brazil, there are a lot of followers of Léon Denis, and Argentina, Latin America in general. So those were really the ones who sustained, let's say, the strength of the movement in that period.
And that is very interesting, because we basically have an astronomer, a philosopher, and a scientist of good repute,
Yeah.
known at the time, being some of those folks who were continuing Kardec's work,
Yeah.
which I guess says something about the depth and breadth of Spiritism, of how powerful, a body of knowledge, a science it really can be. So thanks for that. I just want to make sure we pause there
You're
because
welcome. Yeah.
those are great figures that we don't often get to hear about.
That's really interesting. Wow.
Shall I continue?
Well, please, if
Yes,
you
please,
were.
please.
So later on, so it was Jean Meyer and Hubert Forestier who were leading the Spiritist movement. Then came the Second World War. Jean Meyer passed away as well a little bit before, and Hubert Forestier a little bit after. But that was then the most difficult period where almost everything disappeared. I mean, the leaders clearly changed the way, transformed Spiritism into the Spiritist movement into more parapsychological movement, until, let's say, the 70s, where some guys were not happy with that and came back constructing again, let's say, a genuine Spiritist movement in France, and in particular Roger Pérez, Louis Serret, and so on. And that was the starting point of what is existing today. And today, I could say in France, there is something like 50 to 60 Spiritist groups, bigger or smaller, but which are really following again, let's say, Spiritism as it was established and codified by Allan Kardec. That's the status where we are today, and I see really growing, always new groups, a lot of people interested, and it's in a positive move to grow. And the biggest problem we have are inside the Spiritist movement itself, because of the well-known problems sometimes with some spiritual leaders, which do not always behave as they should, let's say, putting the teachings into practice.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest problem, but I hope it is temporary and that it will get solved soon, so that the movement can really continue growing as it chose to.
And that's one of the challenges with Spiritism, because we don't have a hierarchy, we don't have clergy, we don't have bosses. It's always up for grabs, and there's always conversations and so forth, which really keep its diverse flavor and allows everybody to chip in and contribute. But at the same time, sometimes, as a long process that involves lots of people, we're prone to these problems, right? Where we have people who come in and do different things, and then there's always debate about, oh, hold on a second, are you a Spiritist or you're not a Spiritist? Are you being loyal to the idea, or are you doing something new? So that's always something that I feel like we're going to constantly have to kind of watch out for.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. But the point is, okay, what do we agree upon? And what do we agree upon is the basis, and the basis are the books of Kardec.
Yeah.
So all what came later on and which is consistent with this, like Chico Xavier, like Divaldo, like Léon Denis, like others, okay, this should remain the basis. Of course, there is always new things popping up, new fashions or whatever, but what we can see is generally they are not so strong, not so clear, not so logical, not so in accordance with the common sense, and after a certain time they disappear again. And that's exactly, as you told, the consequence. I mean, the law of freedom is the basic law of the spiritual teachings, so we have to follow it. It will take, of course, more time than something which is imposed or dictated, but at the end, the result will be that it will be stronger.
It will also last longer, exactly.
It lasts longer, but at the end, it will be stronger.
And that's one of the beauties of Spiritism. One of my favorite parts about it as well is what Kardec described as the universal control of the spirits.
Correct.
By saying that if something is truly true, it will pop up in many different places and many different times, because, of course, God would never reveal something to just a few and not others. So oftentimes we will just put things aside until we have confirmation, following a very scientific process of making sure that we can replicate that information and that knowledge before we fully internalize it, right?
Correct.
So, Charles, that's so interesting. Thank you for that I feel like a history lesson. My question for you, if I may, is now that we know where Spiritism in France has been, what do you think is next?
I would say next is to come again to the extension worldwide. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here in Australia today, to support this growing movement here in this country. And also to support this event that we could participate, the first Spiritist Film Festival in Australia. And I'm really positively surprised to see how many people and how many initiatives are taken worldwide, here in Australia and in the whole world, based on these initial teachings established by Allan Kardec in the 19th century. It's really amazing. And the next step will be exactly as you told, getting universal again and spreading progressively throughout the whole world.
Yeah, and something that Charles was polite enough not to say was that he's also very involved and has been very involved with helping Spiritism and folks who are on the ground in different countries throughout the world by sharing his experiences and how to bring people together and what could be next. So we're very grateful that he's here. And I think he mentioned something which was great too, which was this wonderful film festival that we had here, which was a 3-day event where we had a combination of movies, book fairs, and talks, which was really interesting. And it was a pleasure to come and get to know a lot of the many different Spiritist groups here in Australia, which I think are about 11 or so right about now.
Yes.
If I get the number right. So here we are. This is the reason why we have a French man, an American citizen, and a half Brazilian, half German, half something else maybe, 3/3?
No, just half and half.
Half and half. In a car is the beginning of a bad joke. But
well, I wanted to say a very big thank you for coming here to the festival and to sharing all your knowledge and all your kindness with us, because we are just starting with spreading the word, and it's really important to have this support and to have this this positive attitude from you. This help is really so great. I'm really very thankful that you came to Australia, you too. So Charles and Daniel.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
indeed.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having us. We're really, really appreciative of that. And I wonder if we can continue this conversation, Charles, one of these days about Spiritism in France in general. I know that you have also done some other research, on Kardec's life and where he's lived, and you discovered a couple of very interesting things. And so we have to figure it out. How do we continue that conversation?
It will be a pleasure for me. I really stay at your disposition. Bon, it's a kind of a passion to go to search, and now with all this digitalizing of archives and so on, it gets much easier and much quicker to find a lot of things, and to know a little bit better who he was, from which family he came from, and his father, his mother, to see where he grew up and so on. And I think it's really something fantastic, because showing really not only the work he did, but also who he was as a person.
Indeed, thank you. So we look forward to having you back one of these days, Charles. We're going to figure it out a way.
With pleasure.
And thank you so much for being here, for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us. And thank you, Helga, for keeping us company and delivering us safely from Brisbane all the way to the Gold Coast. And also, of course, being part of the conversation.